Are you listening here?
Yeah, I'm listening.
All right. Hello,
It's been quite a while since I've done this.
All right, so we're live. Hey, audience, how's it hanging? So we're here to talk about managing multiple dev teams, and the topic of discussion is actually something that Whitney came up with because it's a problem that she faced. So I'm going to let Whitney introduce this topic in a more thorough way, and go for it.
Cool. Hey, everyone. Okay, so the problem space that we're going to be discussing and getting input from various people who've had a lot of experience context switching and managing multiple different dev teams is as a senior person in an organization, typically you end up getting involved in all these little stand-ups, which is helpful because you find that some of the information bubbles up in those meetings, but often it's a giant waste of time. So how do you, like the question posed to all of these people, because I want to know the answers, like how everybody is facing this. It's just how you balance that. And then also maybe I always find that sometimes it can be a little, I can sometimes feel nervous when non-technical people who don't have as much context and they're just maybe like a project manager without a technical background, they obviously wouldn't be able to listen to certain things and hear the red flags. You actually do need sometimes, like technical people involved. Otherwise, you wouldn't
Or
be
they
able to
come up
see
with
some of the glaring
solutions
holes.
without any of the problems.
Okay.
Well, that's a great point, Tim. I feel like we should talk about that in a moment. So that's the context, everybody. I think everybody who is maybe part of this live stream would understand in some ways how tedious stand-ups can be, especially if you're in large teams and people don't make it efficient. So I guess we're just kind of talking about the role of stand-ups, because I also feel like they add to social cohesion and the team spirit, people getting the time to hang out together. So how do you balance that with actually like not wasting the seniors' time as well as getting everybody aligned? That's the topic. Cool. So over to you, Sheena.
Okay, cool. So that's the topic, and it's a big, hairy one with lots and lots of different layers. So we got quite a few different experts in the room, as you can see, and we've all got a variety of different backgrounds. So just going to do a little bit of an intro. I'll let everybody introduce themselves, and they must remember to shamelessly plug their podcast. VT. All right. Let's go VT first.
Just remember your mic's muted.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go first. Hi everyone. I'm VT. Everyone always asks, what does VT stand for? It doesn't stand for anything. It's just a nickname. My full name is Vutlari Rikoto, and that's exactly why I go by VT. In my current role, I'm a principal consultant. I know consultants are not loved very much in the universe, but we're part of the good ones. So I do manage multiple teams, help clients, things like that. I'm still very much a developer at heart. I really, really do love helping people kind of find rhythm in their teams. I've worked in consulting, I've worked in agency, and I've also worked for a product company. So I've kind of gotten some really nice, well-rounded, views of different types of teams. Yeah, and I generally just love helping people get into tech and thrive. And I do have a podcast where I talk about exactly that, called Z8 Tech Radio.
Thank you, VT. Let's go with Takunda next.
Sure, thank you. And thanks for inviting me. So I'm Takunda. I'm an agile coach. Worked as Scrum Master before and as a project manager before that. And so when you talk about stand-ups and how to get the most out of them as a senior tech lead, that really speaks to what I've experienced over these many years. So I'm looking forward to adding my agile voice to the discussion and some tips and tricks on how you can not get bogged down in so many meetings and rather get the gist of what you need without so much of the overhead.
Awesome.
Yay!
Tim?
So excited.
Okay, I'm currently a consultant. I'm a bit all over the place, from DevOps to dev. My background is also quite varied, from networking development with AfriHost, but mainly been consulting across many different projects, like currently about 6 different projects running now. Yeah.
It's
I
smashing.
feel like we need there should be like an obligatory hype man. I'll be that hype man. Tim's not hyping himself up enough. He runs his own company. I've never seen anybody context switch like that man can. It is, yeah, my ADD brain. I'll like fire stuff at him. I'm like, this happened, and he's like, figures out which project I'm talking about, which problem, and I'm always just like, damn, like how? And he's got other things that he's working on, which are often way harder than what I'm busy with. Anyway, it's been great getting to work with you, and we met via ZA Tech actually. I was like,
Mm.
I needed
Public knowledge.
I was like, I need an AWS contractor, please. An expert needs to come at me because AWS interface. Yeah, it was hard. It was
It's a lot.
hard, and I got dropped in the deep end because somebody just stopped showing up at work, and I was like, "Oh no, oh no, no, no!" So anyway, I messaged Tim, and I'm like, "Hey, can you like unblock me?" Anyway, we're on a call, and we ended up becoming friends. Like it was, yeah, we had to wait for something to build, and then, yeah, okay. Story time aside from that side,
Rock
I'm
on.
Whitney. I'm a developer by trade, I guess, and then I switched into doing technical management. I ran my own software company, and now I've scaled it down because I don't want to be running a consultancy anymore. And I now know how to manage multiple tech projects at the same time. So I joined Umuzi as the head of programs. So I'm a program manager now. And yes, also because I'm a good hype man, I'm going to introduce Sheena. Sheena is the most amazing CTO ever. Sheena is able to literally get people. I don't know, you guys, like most people in this audience, maybe, I don't know, have trained technical people, but to train thousands of people from like zero to becoming an employed developer, that is like, it's God
Very
mode.
hard.
And so, like, and automating that and building all the software and just crazy, crazy, crazy. So she doesn't give herself enough credit. She's just like, I'm the CTO. What does that mean, Sheena? It means you're busy doing.
I'm still figuring that out actually. It means a lot of different things. Yeah. But thank you for the hype. Yes, I'm the CTO of Abuzi, and I work to try and get people into careers. But I think I've introduced myself on this channel a couple of times, so yeah, and it makes me a little awkward. Let's let's get into the topic. So, with like you've had this problem and you were bumping your head against it at some point. I think that we've all kind of had some time to think about it and think about different strategies that we've used ourselves and different kind of theories that about like what could be going wrong in different circumstances. I think let's go around and, or actually, let me start off with the theory, and then we can just riff on that. And then if anybody wants to add their own theory into the mix or strategy into the mix, just like let us know.
Sounds good.
Sweet. So I think that if you have a whole lot of dev teams and they all are likely to stumble at some point, they all are, because it's very much impossible to have like the perfect dev team that is fully trusted on all the things and has the perfect knowledge of all the things. Like the only way to give a dev team perfect knowledge of the things is to build the freaking tool and give it to them. And that's what you need the dev team to do. So like there's always going to be mess ups and little fires and misunderstandings, and that's normal. And so my thought is that there's like maybe an 80-20 thing that can be done. It's like there's probably certain stand-ups where there are more likely to be like fires and problems to be found, and certain stand-ups where it's just like, yeah, this is just normal grind, like nothing surprising is happening here at all. And so if you can figure out which ones are the sketchy ones, then you should go to those. And so you can probably like prioritize things in a way to say like, okay, cool, let's just like front load, like you should always anyway, just like front load the risky issues, where things are like the tasks where you're like, I don't know how this is going to pan out. So if you can do that in a reliable, predictable way, then you just go to those stand-ups. I don't know. How does that sound?
It sounds optimistic, if you ask me. I don't
I'm going to be more controversial with it. I don't think stand-up's a good place to get that deep insight. Stand-up should be quick. It should be very. If you're joining in, you can just get a feel for what's going on, but you should also every now and again be spending some time with the people and all the rest of it, because actually just watching them as they're working and stuff, because it's not as stressful, because people don't feel so bad, and you tend to actually pick up a lot more. Where stand-up should be as quick as humanly possible. Otherwise, you just end up wasting a lot of time and money, and it gets frustrating. You have where people want to talk for 30 minutes, and you've got to get on with things. So I think, right, if you're actually trying to manage multiple teams, stand up, yes, to get a good overview, you should be at a couple, but actually you need to spend a bit of time with each of the teams and just chat.
Okay, so how would that look? Would that be like having a weekly meeting? Would there be a cadence to it or a structure to it, or would it be something a bit more ad hoc?
I'm not that structured, so it would tend to be like, depending on what you like. You tend to know. Like, I can't explain it, but that's maybe because you've done it. There's that problem when you've been doing something for so long, you sort of forget what you're doing. But generally, like, it's just spending a bit of time with the people. Like, if you can, depending on how many teams are we talking about? 2 to 5, yes, then you can spend time with everyone every week. 50,
I think maybe
now
the
you're getting into larger problems.
The concern is almost like, let's say these dev teams are doing their thing, you attend the stand-ups, the rest of your day, like you're super busy and trying, like everybody else is calling meetings with you, and then on top of it you have to get your actual work done. And then there's the stand-ups bubble information up in a weird way where people will be like, oh, I'm doing this, and then you're like, wait a second, why are you doing that? Because we have maybe more context, or we're like, that's an odd way of solving things. So sometimes you won't know that until the code review process, for example, and so it's like, it's kind of useful catching it in the morning, but also I can't stand up. It needs to go faster.
Yeah.
Look, I think it.
Sorry.
I think it depends, right? And I think a major factor in how you end up handling your teams depends on like the path that you came in. A lot of us, go the engineering route, where we get to a point where you're a senior developer, and you think that the natural next path is to go into engineering management. And in most cases like that, you find someone who still wants to be very much technically involved, and it becomes very difficult to juggle everything, because you still want to write the code, you want to be in every review, but you find people who were trained properly into engineering management, from a very early age, maybe because their people skills were a bit way more mature, and someone took them under their wing and helped them there, and they have different experiences. I think the whole thing around stand up or not stand up will depend, based on team size, as Tim said. It will also depend on your own maturity. The way I like to look at it is, I think when you move up to the point of managing more than one team, then suddenly you move from flow driven work into interrupt driven work. Because when you're a developer, you want to achieve flow, you want to get your head down, drink as much coffee as possible, put your Slack on do not disturb, and find as much focus time as possible. But when you start managing teams, then suddenly you want to be available within reason for those teams. And for some people, it might be, I'm going to be in the stand up, and that's going to give me the context that I want. Personally, I don't like that, because stand-ups end up being a lot of noise. I like one-on-ones better, but one-on-ones with the right levels. So, the leaders in those teams become the people that I'm going to have the conversation with, as opposed to trying to have a conversation with everyone in there, and then encourage those people to have one-on-ones with the people in their sub team. And I just feel like you avoid you avoid the noise a bit more, while allowing yourself to be available for the team.
Oh, that's awesome. I think
I've got
Takunda,
a
you had
question
a
for
hand up
Takunda.
as well,
Hey,
hey?
Jacinda, yeah.
Yeah. So I like what everyone has been saying so far. And when I think about the problem, I look at it from a leadership perspective to say, what do you want as a leader? When you are now managing multiple development teams, you almost want to dissolve yourself or multiply yourself into the team, right? And what does that mean? It means creating the mindset that you would bring to a standard, right? So you're coming to a standard to ensure quality is being adhered to, principles are being adhered to. We're not cutting corners, we're sticking to the script. If you can get the individuals on those teams to think that way and look out for those red flags, even in your apps, you've done a great job as lead. You've done a great job as a leader. Because then, even in your absence, people will bubble up those issues, like how you said, and bring them to your attention. Where you find yourself having to be in every single stand-up because you're trying to catch these fires before they become fires, I would question whether you've set the vision clearly. You've set the standard clearly of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, what's tolerable and what's not tolerable. If you've done a good job at that, you should find that the teams are able to pick up that this requires, VT's attention. This requires team's attention. I think after stand up, let's take this to him. Or we can deal with this. I think we've got this under control. Let's take care of it. And if it does get under, a little bit worse than it is, then we'll take it to Tim. So it's about setting that base, setting that standard that everybody should follow, and then you don't have to be, everywhere at the same time.
I think that's cool. But it also sort of says that the team itself needs to be mature in a way. Because if it's a new team, then it's like you don't have that. And if there are new team members, then you don't have that. So it's like I agree fully. But I also think that if a team's not there yet, then it's probably nobody's fault a lot of the time. It could just be like you're still like tending in that direction. Does that ring true?
It does. But also you have the problem where some teams are slightly dysfunctional. Sadly, it does happen, and normally then they maybe just need a bit of time. You need to give them a bit more time, more just to like fix some of the things. Like my big problem with joining all the stand-ups, I just wanted to add is like I'm on at the moment I think 6 different projects or 7 different projects. Everybody has stand up about the same time. Like you can't. And this is also part of why I say that eventually, like I know it's both a good problem and like generally when things get bad enough, I do get called in because there's certain problems that at a certain level only senior people can solve. So that actually, I don't know, tends to be sort of sometimes how you handle it, depending on how busy you are. It's a problem. But yeah, spending time with people is about the only way I can think of actually solving it.
So I've got a question for. Sorry, do you want to go? Fine.
Yeah, so I wanted to add on to like the whole thing. I think when you are dealing with a new team, you might need more involvement. Hopefully, you're not managing multiple teams that are spawning at the exact same time, because I think that becomes very difficult. Because speaking of dysfunctions of a team, if you read the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, there's a lot of that covered around team trust, and you don't get that by default. It means you have to be in the team, in the trenches with them, understand the kind of personalities, understand if you've got the right makeup of people to actually form a team, identify who the leaders are and things like that. And I think once you reach that maturity where you have leaders, then it becomes possible to apply more broader rules. So my default rule when I do have leaders in the team is that color coding. So I've got green, amber, and red. If something's green, I don't really need to know. I'll see that in the weekly status report. If something is amber, please deal with it. And if it's red, then you can bring me in. And I think you work more on training the leaders to be able to figure out at what level to involve you. Then you kind of almost offload that responsibility to someone else. Of course, this becomes very difficult when you don't have those leaders in a team, and that is a team that might require more of your attention, and your most immediate responsibility then is to hire a leader for that team, so you don't have to be so involved.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I want to add. I want to add to what you just said, because you touched on something quite important there around the if a team, depending on their maturity level, right? But then, how much time do you give a team to become mature, right? How much time do you invest of yourself, and how long do you do that until you know? And what's weeks? Is it months? Is it years? When do we say now a team is mature enough that I can pull back a little bit and allow them to then sort of be autonomous and self-manage? And I find it quite important that you don't overdo it. Otherwise, you end up yourself becoming a bottleneck to that team. If you're always there to rescue them, you're always there to pick up where they've missed out. Sometimes you kind of have to let them fail and hurt themselves a little bit, and then they kind of understand, okay, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. So I don't have an answer for you, but it's a question that pops up in my mind to say, when is mature? How do you know?
Yeah, like I'm going to go there. Like failure is actually important. Like we don't, sometimes you want to save people from failure, but it's actually incredibly important. That whole thing of if you bubble wrap a kid and make sure they don't go outside and all the rest of it, they actually, you disadvantage them. And the same with teams. You actually got to lead them a bit. And my other answer is like, if you find you stepping in all the time, it means you're not busy enough. Sounds horrible. Like just get really busy, and some of these problems just you don't have because you just don't have time. And then it's more a lot of educating people of when to call you in, which can sometimes be a bit confrontational, sadly. Or sometimes you've got to actually do the opposite. Is like, hey, I see you've been stuck with this for a week. Why? Please learn to get hold of me. And then you get the other guys who just want to, every problem they don't want to think, and then they want to come to you. Those are those are the more confrontational ones I find. But you've got to watch out for both. Because there's always going to be that one quiet person who's potentially a more junior person who feels like slightly inadequate or shy to come to you with a problem where they really are stuck. And it's just to watch out. Like that's more where I think you actually have to watch out a lot for those things.
Yeah, that makes
I was
sense.
that annoying person. I would ask. I asked for way too much help. I'm like always like, blessed be the developers that dealt with me in my career. Like Ahmed Takiwa, if you're here, if you're listening, I respect you so much because of what I put you through. I'm so sorry. Anyway.
I see a cool question from Info. There we go. Come on, button, do your thing. All right. Is leadership innate or can it be cultivated over time? So personally, I think it can be cultivated over time.
I'm going to say the answer is yes.
Yeah. There we go.
It's a bit of both.
That's a really good answer. Yeah.
You can teach. Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah, I'll jump into that one. It's both, and that's why I said your answer is correct. It's yes. It's both. Some people are born with the natural feeling for it, with the natural lean towards it, and some can develop. So it's both. If you don't naturally gravitate towards being a leader and you want to learn to be a leader, it takes that intentionality. You got to be intentional about it. You have to actually pursue it, find people who can coach you into it, mentor you into it. But the same for someone who naturally tends to bubble up as a leader in a group of people. You still also need someone to coach you so you can hone that skill. And in every group of people, you will find someone that sort of naturally gravitates towards being a leader. It's important to have that individual as in any team because you need someone to be able to set the bar and set it quite high.
Something I just want to add there is
sorry to me.
I don't I don't agree with what you're saying, but sometimes there are no mentors, and then you just have to dive in. Like it sounds like start a group with something. You're going to fail a bit, but failure is not actually as bad as you think it is. It's quite scary initially, but sometimes you just got to push yourself and do it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's most people don't realize how most people are just like, we all feel like we're pretending to be doing a lot of things, and you're just getting on with stuff. Like, if you want to learn to be better at talking, do a podcast. I know I did that a couple of years ago, and it like made scary improvements. But when we started, we were horrible. And the same with leadership. Like, if you want to learn leadership, you can learn it, even if you're not very good at it and you shine all the rest of it. Go online, read a couple of things, but like the best thing you can do is just force yourself to start doing something. And if you do it often enough, eventually you actually stop thinking about it and it starts naturally happening. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's always pleasant, but you can actually push yourself.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think that these things these are skills to be grown and learned.
One thing I will add is you can't force somebody else to learn it. This is
Yeah.
my biggest thing. It's like if you see somebody, it's like, oh, I really want this person to be a leader. If they don't want it, you can't. Like the person actually needs to want it enough to actually put the effort in.
Yeah,
But
it makes sense.
I think it also, I think there's I like to differentiate between manager and leader, because manager comes a lot with a title and an expectation, but you don't have to be the most senior person in the team to be a leader. Really, like, leaders are really just people who have people who are willing to follow them, and I think you can do that from anywhere, and I think it will differ based on your style. Some people lead from the back, some from the front, and personally I lead from within. And I think definitely it's something that you can learn, but I think you need to define what it means for you. When Paul asked, like, is leadership something that you can learn? Because some people, especially in technology companies, look at leadership as in like leading teams through like meetings and things like that. But there's technical leadership, right? So there's that track where maybe you don't really like attending meetings for 70% of your week, and maybe you don't like the soft and mushy stuff that comes with managing people, but you're a very good technical leader, right? You're at the top of your game in terms of like new technologies that come in, and at that level you're willing to kind of like be at the front and walk people through things, walk people through training and things like that. So I think it you first have to define exactly what you mean by that leadership, because it can happen at different levels, and each level will require like a different competence, and maybe also different levels of training. Some might come a bit more naturally, especially technical leadership if you're very technically inclined. But if you want to be, for example, an executive at a team, then maybe you need an executive coach, because there's a lot of things that come with that responsibility that you don't really maybe pick up naturally.
I think that's great. I think it's quite nice that you've got that nuance of like different types of leadership. Like there can be technical leadership, which is just like this very like nerdy thing a lot of the time, but it's still about affecting people's behavior. And I think leading from within a team is completely legit as well. A lot of the time, it's just about setting a good example. Um, like that can be a very, very powerful way to practice leadership, even if you're not in a leadership position. There is another question here from Kyle.
Wait, I wanted to weigh
Hey?
in. I just wanted to say
Okay,
something
cool, go.
quickly. I just wanted to
Absolutely.
say to Takunda that I really like what you said about the intentionality. But I'd also just throw in, I think, just initiative and conscientiousness in general. That's how I found leaders can be grown. It's just like if you try to see and have empathy for what your manager is experiencing. Like just try to imagine yourself like 10 times busier and then with 100 times more emails, and then you're like, you send some random bit of context. Like you need to frame that context for a busy person. You need to give them extra information because they don't want to hunt around their inbox to find what
Is
on
it
earth
what
you're
you
talking about. Okay.
is that?
Yeah.
I remember the next time you send me an email.
Hey.
Lol.
It's not the time for in jokes, Tim. Anywho, so I guess just if you want to cultivate like leadership, or I mean, entrepreneurial skills as well, if you want to start your own things, taking initiative and trying to just spot the gaps. If you can see that your team is struggling, like your project manager, for example, is struggling to make your Kanban board up to date, you could be like, hey, I can come in and take, you know, this person's tasks and help you understand what they are so that you can get through your work faster, because I can be the technical, I speak tech, and maybe that'll help the project manager, maybe they're not, whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like there can be all these different ways in which you can just if you take
Step up
initiative,
into that
you'll
role, yeah.
people will just be like, oh my gosh, thank you. And then all of a sudden you just end up naturally learning that like vision, you know. I don't know if you
Just
Yeah.
don't. One piece of advice is to be careful not to pick up too much. Like
Yeah, I
help,
suppose you
not
don't want to.
like you can become the person that everybody gives the stuff. There's a weird balance in there, especially if you've got high empathy and all the rest of it. You can be taken
but that's
advantage
where
of,
the
and it's
intentionality circle, like I feel like that just ties all in a bow. If you're intentional, or like Tim, you're pointing out that people need to be intentional also about like the track or the way that they're dedicating their energy into being conscientious or so on. So it's like if you, for example, really enjoy the culture side of a team, like making the team culture very good, then you can be intentional about maybe creating more cohesion with like fun things to do for the team and stuff like that. But if you want to be known for being more technical, that is a bad idea to be intentional about like the extra fun stuff, you know. Cool.
So I'm actually
cool.
going to jump
Did
to a
you want to
different.
switch back to the question, because it actually tied into what VT was talking about? Sorry, I know we're contexting it, but and maybe VT can continue with the question, which was from Carl Hughes. How do you ensure teams stay adaptable to technology advancements and changing market conditions? Sort of ties into what you were talking about earlier, VT.
Cool. Can I go ahead?
Yeah, please.
Okay, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Look, I think it's a very difficult one. I think you need to first of all understand your team. When I look at management, I almost see it in three buckets. You've got your team, you've got collaboration, and you've got your own work, right? And within your team, there's multiple things. It's one of the most important things within your team is career laddering. You need to be very clear around where people are and how they get to the next level and what the expectation is at those levels. And I think when you clear, then you get to balance things a bit more, because your more entry level or junior team members might be more willing to experiment a bit more with things, and you encourage them to do that, right? So they can play around with whether there's a React or Vue and demo it to the team, because it kind of trains them up in being able to push their ideas, sharpening their communication, and also helping them kind of research and learn how to make decisions, right? Your more intermediate level stuff would be dealing more with kind of the stability of the team in terms of mentoring your juniors, scoping work and things like that, and where your more senior people would be around, like, be comfortable with doing the boring stuff. So I think it's really get understanding the values of your team members, being very clear about career laddering and where they are, um, and prioritizing things like happiness and drive, right? Because when you understand what drives different people in your team, then you'll find the people who are happy making sure that things are steady, right? And those people will kind of keep your business running. But you'll also find people who are very curious and want to experiment and build proofs of concepts and things like that. So I think it's about striking the right balance, and also knowing how to scale up your team, right? Because when you scale up your team, it's like when you start your own business. You initially, when you hire in your business, you hire for your weaknesses. So you hire people to cover where you're weak, and the same thing in the team. You hire to cover the weaknesses of the team. But as that team grows and reaches maturity and things like that, then you start to hire to move up some people into management, and you hire for the same skills that you have. And I think it's about keeping that fresh. And the only way you can do that is having very clear career ladders, being very close to the ambitions of your team, and constantly playing around with that makeup of the team, because then everyone knows what role they play, and everyone gets a good chance to either do the stable stuff or play around with the more experimental work.
Cool.
I'll jump into that one as well.
Okay, I'll go after.
Yeah, so when I had the question, I was thinking more from the perspective of changing market conditions in light of your customer, right? And we have these built-in feedback loops when we talk about agility that allow us to have a sense of what is happening out there and how our product is being perceived. And so to keep, as if you have many teams that you're managing, abreast on what's happening in the market and how the market is changing, I would say make the most of those feedback loops. A lot of times we say, we want to listen to the voice of the customer so we know whether what we're giving them actually is making a difference in their lives, but we don't actually sit with the customer. We don't invite the customer. We put as many proxies between us and the customer as possible. And I would say dissolve that as much as you can. Try your best to get a friendly customer who understands the idea of experimentation and failing and things not being as crisp and pristine, who's willing to work with you on getting your product better and putting your developers front and center of that person. So now you've gotten that friendly customer. Don't now put extra layers of humans between the customer and your team. Bring your teams to that customer and let that interaction happen. At first, it'll be messy like anything else. And then over time, they will, and you want even, how you mentioned, the most junior people in the team to have that interaction as well. You want you're as strong as your weakest link, right? So you want everybody to be able to understand what is happening with the customer, what actually the experience is. And then you can obviously come back after the customer's gone and say, what did you learn from that? What would you do differently if you owned this product and it was yours? After hearing what the customer just said, what would you do about it? This is where then they have this expectation of them to figure out these innovative and new trends in technology, et cetera, that they can bring in to try and remedy whatever the customer is not happy with. So you don't always become the center and the source of all knowledge. The team themselves have the opportunity to lead. We talk about leadership just now in coming up with solutions, in understanding the customer, and creating your product alongside with you.
I think that's great.
Cool.
So I want to.
For anybody who's wanting maybe like a slightly more practical answer to this a bit, what one of the teams I was on, they did is every 2 weeks, one of the people on the team would have to give a 15-minute talk. Whatever they wanted, they could pick anything, even if it was something untech related or whatever, and it would rotate through the team. And normally it would be some new technology that they're working on, or the people who were interested in new technology would be talking about that. Some of the people more talking about some interesting thing that's in the code. But now you're getting a lot of knowledge share, and you're also getting those people who are interested in new technology actually handing over the exciting things that are happening. It's just maybe a slightly more, once again, it needs to be short. And I think it's also quite good for people's career progression to learn to talk in front of others. So it actually serves sort of a double purpose.
Yeah, that's cool. And of course, that way they build some rapport with their team as well, which I think is a big deal. I think if you stand in front of your team and you're like, let me tell you about this cool thing I found, and they're actually supportive, I think culturally that's a very, very solid thing, which can also contribute to a lot of good internal communication, which can overcome certain problems and certain fires that you'd generally pick up on maybe in a stand-up. So I want to circle back to the original problem, which was around like how to get all of the benefit of being in all the stand-ups really without being in all the stand-ups. So one question I have is like, what kinds of fires do you typically spot in a stand-up that you wouldn't necessarily be able to spot if you skip them out? So I suppose one of them might be, so there's a question here about how you overcome conflict within your team, and that might be one of the problems as well. It's like maybe your team members are just like clashing and they can't decide about how to do a thing. So that's something. But are there other kinds of problems, or any like specific like flavors of problems?
No, I'm going to say the problems I've normally seen when I am going through all the teams is slightly more on the technical, where people are going down wrong paths and stuff like that. You can go, well, stop. You're going down the street, especially if you're on the more senior side. You can just hear problems coming about, and it's more once again, I think the smaller ones you should leave because that they will hit and then overcome.
Yeah.
Because there is something very important about overcoming those things. It's more the big structural ones. You know, they're going to go down the things that to undo might take a lot of work.
Yeah.
I'm
So
trying to
some
think
have
of
lock-in and some don't. Yeah.
but there's more like the, you know, the overall structure of how they're going to implement something. I can't think of a good example right off the top of my head, but I've hit that a couple of times when I've been in. The problem being that, once again, you can't always be there to save. Like, eventually, if you are in that many teams, you want to eventually have, like, the team starting to manage themselves would be the eventual goal. But it's complicated. It depends on the makeup of the team and who you've managed to get and the rest of it.
So it's like they could be just like building the thing wrong. They could also be building the wrong thing. So that's like another
Yeah,
flavor.
from my side, the fires that I tend to hear and listen out for are mostly to do with taking ownership and accountability for the completion of the work that you're doing, regardless of what you come up against. Right? So you tend to get a situation where you hit a roadblock, something is not panning out the way you hoped it would, and so you're like, okay, I found a problem, so I'm putting it to blocked. You know, that's it. I'm going to move on to something else. You know, what I'm looking for there is what are you doing to try and unblock that? Are you waiting for someone to come and do it for you? What steps are you taking to try and get over this hurdle? I'm looking for resilience and persistence, you know, all those nice things that we want our people to have. I'm looking for signs of those. And when I don't see that, that for me is a fire, is a red flag that, okay, are we babysitting people here, or do we have people who are coming to deliver alongside us, right? And we want people who are going to take ownership from start to end on something. And if I see that consistent effort in trying to resolve an issue, and you really are exhausting your options and trying to do so, then we can step in knowing that you covered the basics at least. You've tried to find the root cause to your problem, and you've tried to resolve it, and you really are running out of options.
A good way to sort of deal with that a little bit is when somebody comes to you, say, okay, what have you tried so far and hasn't worked? And if they can't give you anything, it's like, okay, go away, try a couple of things.
Yeah.
Sometimes you feel like you're being very horrible to them because sometimes you know the answer. And sometimes you can't just help yourself because you're really busy. You don't have time to manage at that level. But if you can, it's that question of like, what have you tried and what's failed? Because even if you hear that, also sometimes as a senior, you can also lead them through a couple things like, oh, that's interesting. Did you see these things?
VT, what do you want to say there?
So I think the one thing that I look out for mainly in stand-ups is how long people are talking, right? Because I think level of complexity in what someone is saying is a good indicator of how well they're tracking. Because stand-up really should be I'm done with my task and I'm picking up a next task, or I'm still stuck on something and these are the steps I'm taking. I'm speaking to John and James after stand up today, and if I don't come right, then I'll do that. So I coach things around like time boxing in the team, so it's better for me if 2 days into the sprint you realize that this is going to be more difficult because your assumptions were wrong. And I think that's the communication I'm looking forward to. It's we're 2 days in. We had made assumption 1, 2, and 3. We've realized that 2 and 3 were wrong, and we only write about 1. So can we move this into the backlog? Can I pick up something else, or can I get someone to help me with this? So I think it's that level of alignment with the goals of the team, and I think we need to look out for the fact that developers get bored. Developers get bored so much that they end up doing things to entertain themselves. So when you find someone rambling on and trying to almost justify what they're doing, it's usually like an indicator that someone might be going off track. But when it's like, I'm done with the task that I was doing yesterday, or yesterday I said I would be done with this task by end of the day, but I've hit blocker 1, 2, and 3. This is what I'm doing to do that. Hopefully by the end of the day, I'll be okay. If I'm not okay, I'll reach out, right? So you looking for that kind of very brief, very short update that is clear and easy to understand. And as soon as it gets way more complex than that, it's usually an indicator that something might be going wrong.
Okay, that's cool. I think that there's a whole lot there. Like, so I've been taking some notes here. So one thing that I've noticed is that if you have a stand up with a bunch of devs in it and they aren't that interested in listening to each other, then problems don't get noticed so much. So like one of the almost like anti-patterns of stand-ups is like devs just being unengaged. Like they'll just say their piece and then they'll like unplug. Even like they don't necessarily pull out a phone and start looking at it, but they don't necessarily always like see the benefit of just like listening to every person's piece. But I think that that's something that's quite necessary. And do you feel like that would make stand-ups less risky if everybody was just listening?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
tend to see the problem more where stand-ups are taking too long. Like
Well, that's why
I've
I
noticed
think
it's, yeah.
with
Yep,
what
sorry.
VT was saying, I think one of the main things I picked out there is structure to some extent. What you're looking for is clear, concise structure to, and I think if you train people and get them into the habit of like for example, in your one of your examples, you're like, I'm stuck on this task, but I'm going to reach out to John or whatever in the afternoon. I would say ideally, actually, something that might be more useful is saying, I'm working on this task. This is the thing that I'm experiencing. Like I'm finding that, I'm not able to get this environment variable, whatever, and I'm going to speak to this person about it later, just so that, because those are the insights that you're kind of looking for, and the senior person might be, scanning for. And I think maybe it's, look, okay, so now interesting question maybe to pose to everybody as well. I'm curious about, like, there's meetings where I manage it like very hardcore, very like, okay, you blockers, like militant, and it's very efficient, but it's not very like good in terms of like the culture. I like things being very free format, and I feel like if I experienced me as the manager, if I was a developer, I would be like, there's not enough time to like, cause nonsense, crack jokes. There's like there's a good amount. Sometimes there's an amount of that that's like, I don't know, fun. You get to know somebody.
Yeah, but my thing is stand-up's not the place for that.
100%
Yeah.
agreed.
I was gonna say we honestly shouldn't be managing our teams only in stand up. Stand up is just but one event that we have, and that should just be an insight into what's happening, what happened yesterday, and what's probably going to happen today.
I know. I
But
just say it tends to it
No,
tends to be everybody together,
yeah,
and that doesn't normally
but
happen
but
unless you have all hands. I get it. I understand
yeah.
your guys'
So I'm
rationale.
just like that problem of talking about where people stop paying attention. I feel I start happening like that where it starts to become a social event, because then it's not 10 minutes of like I tend to have so many things to do, and now it's taking 30 minutes of my time. If like in it there's a quick joke or something, great, awesome. But when it's like becomes a more social, what's everyone doing, how's everyone's life's going, then I start bailing on it, because like I don't have the time, especially normally in the mornings for that. At lunchtime we can touch base, or maybe do a social thing later. Um, yeah, like your more senior people are going to bail on it very fast if you start making it too social, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
It's the time problem.
I get. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Peter.
I think in those initial three buckets I think I spoke about your team, and then there's the second one was collaboration, and I think meetings fall squarely in that collaboration, right? We need to be aware that different ceremonies like stand up exist for collaboration, and if they do become a bit too social, people can disengage, and that is very harmful. I'm a big believer in meetings with agendas, and generally just good meetings. There is space normally when, maybe I like joining meetings early, right? So if I'm in the meeting 5 minutes before the meeting starts, that's, a space for how was your weekend? How you doing? What kind of coffee are you having? And then when the time kind of hits, or 2 minutes after that, you start and you get into the business of the day, then it doesn't feel like you're wasting people's time. Um, I think it's really, really important to have be intentional about your meetings. Stand up is for update and for collaboration. One-on-one is to almost deal with the, like the individual career progression and problems of your people. I miss working in the office because you had more opportunities for serendipity, where you're having coffee and you can have those kind of chats. And we try to manufacture that now, working remotely, with having things like town halls, where it's exactly, a space for people to just talk. Some people might not like that. It feels way too manufactured, but I think rather aim for spaces where people can be a bit more social, than letting your all your
Then
meetings,
like letting
including
it all be
stand-ups, kind of
together.
like
Yeah.
exactly devolving into like social gatherings, as opposed to exactly what the purpose of the meeting is.
Yeah. That makes a
Just
lot of
one
sense.
point that I want to add here, because we sort of haven't covered, is something to also remember: team size. I think it's Conway's law. Your team should never be bigger than 11, right? And it's got to do with interactions of people, and like it, as you get more people, you get like an exponential growth of connections. And they say, like, at 11 teams start to get a bit dysfunctional, because they're people that have no idea who own. Like, in my head, an optimum team size is like 5 or 6. You get smaller teams, but like, no larger than 5 or 6 is maybe a better way of putting it, if you can. But sometimes it does, but definitely not more than 11. Yeah.
I have my hand up. Okay, quick question on the topic, on the main topic. If you don't get the information via stand-up, what's the suggestions? Okay, yes,
How
I
do you get it?
understand. Of course, you're not supposed to have stand-ups and use that as your primary tool for understanding the technical challenges in your team. I do understand that. I just find sometimes, like, the thing that I want to talk about is sometimes when in reality is I've not worked at a big company. I've worked at startups, and it is hairy. So it's like it's wishful thinking to be like, oh, there'll be all the structure, and then you'll have a team lead that can pass the baton, and they take responsibility and notes, and everybody, it's like I want to almost work with, like, it's like the worst case scenario, where the manager, you're a technical manager, but you have very little time. And I know we need to learn how to do time management better, but maybe are there any suggestions from the group in terms of, do you think we should put more attention into code review? Like, for example, maybe doing like a video recording and you take time to go through people's coding, or do a session where if people have questions, you're like, cool, let's do a 10-minute. I'm going to run through it like I would as a senior, and then you can interrogate the way I would do it, and then you go forth and do it, and then at least you know the context of like how I would have approached the problem or something. So,
That's cool.
Takunda, yeah.
Yeah, the latter of what you just said. So you gotta start off with what gives you anxiety, right? When you think about your team, what gives you sleepless nights, right? Because you want to hone in on that, and not sort of waffle around everything else. So what is it exactly that you want that information on? What is problematic in your world that you want them to focus on? And show them how you would go about it if it was you, right? Set the example, set the expectation, and don't budge on the quality and the standard that you've set, right? And put the tolerance levels to say, if you're dealing with this XYZ scenario and you're still within these parameters, deal with it. The moment it's outside of these parameters, you bring it to me, right? So you can be militant, like how you said earlier, where you can it's your baby until it's outside of these barriers, outside these parameters. And this is how I would have dealt with it. The moment it goes away, you come to me, then I can deal with it then. So it's really about that clarity of what does Whitney expect out of any scenario. That is what you need to drive home. This way, you get the information, whether it's in stand up or it happens after, during the day, whatever. They know what to bring to you and what is worthy of your attention.
So would there be like a mechanism that you could say people should just like follow these 3 simple steps in order to do this? So would it be like, after the stand up, somebody needs to produce a little like write up of like all of the blockers and then give those to Whitney, or is it like, they just need to record it and the video is transcribed and then Whitney can like consume that media in like double speed or 1 point or like more, so she can like just like listen real quick, or is it just having a good like well-maintained Kanban board, and you can see like, oh, that task has been there for a while. I wonder why. I thought it was a simple one. So like I think there's like loads of different like mechanisms for getting the information across. And some of those are like, okay, cool, let's just have a chat about it. Like, you're the team lead, let's talk now. And so what kind of mechanisms do folks rely on? Yeah,
VT
VT.
first, and then I'll go after.
I like how you put your hand up like a V. It's...
So that is not at all intentional. So my favorite mechanism is a weekly status report. I think it's about accountability and this can take different forms. So in the current company where I work now is, like different leaders have to send an actual weekly status report. So this is what our goals were. I mean, this is what we achieved this week. This is what we're planning to do next week. This is what what went well, and then as well as a raid log. So raid log, risks, issues, key decisions and things like that, and blockers, right? So everything communicated. We wanted to do this, we're blocked by this, we need to collaborate with this other team or something like that. It's a bit more formal because we have to send that out to our clients as well, because when things eventually go wrong, you have a trace, right, of what went wrong. And it also allows the leaders within the team and ultimately the leader of the teams to be accountable. You can kind of go through a weekly status report at the end of Friday. Okay, I see that, this team is green, this is amber. Again, I really like the colors green, amber, and red to kind of decide what requires my immediate focus, what can wait, and what is okay, so that you can kind of give people feedback properly. In the team before this, so I was in a product company, and ultimately I was responsible for having a weekly meeting on Tuesday. Same thing. This is what we're aiming to do for the next week. These are our commitments for the sprint. This is how far we are. And what that forces you to do is to have a conversation with your teams to say, guys, based on your promise, where are we, right? Because I think depending on the size of the team, being that involved in terms of like code review can be either possible or not. And I think you again have to ask yourself if that level of involvement has the right return for you. Because when you become a leader, to me, it stops more being about the how, but more around aligning people with the outcomes, right? And when you align people with the outcomes, then your check-in becomes, are we on track to achieve those outcomes, or are there any blockers, and what is leading to those blockers? Then you start to dive in. So it's not diving by default, it's high level by default, and then dive in when it's absolutely necessary. And I think having that weekly cadence for feedback and for being accountable kind of like keeps your hand on the pulse.
Just one thing I wanted to add there is just, you're talking about what are the 3 rules that people should follow. Just be careful about having prescribed ways of being a team lead or solving these things, because we're all slightly different. I think they did a study, what is the best way to plan a project or work with a project and all. And it tended up not being about how they solve the problems, it tended about being, does the team all agree on it and how well they work together. So that's actually more to do with, if I'm doing a code review and somebody sends me a video, I'm not going to do that because I'll struggle to go through that and absorb it fast. I'd rather okay, send me the code, I'll read through it, and then we'll have a video call afterwards and we'll chat over it, like what I saw, what questions I have. But also then, I like processing first. I don't want to process it while talking to somebody because I struggle to multitask with it like that. It hurts my brain eventually and I get incredibly tired. But that's mine. But you get somebody else who for them that's the perfect way to do it. And neither's right or wrong.
I feel like VT was talking more in terms of like heuristics though, and not like
no, I'm not disagreeing with VT. This was asking what 3 rules should we follow. I'm saying be careful of having that. Just having
if there are hard and sharp rules, or I think hard and sharp rules and also like metrics sometimes can be very bad because people will be like just laser focused on this one little thing, and the world can be falling apart around them, and they're like, but I'm following the rules, and look, the metric is going in the right. Yeah. So
We had a big. Sorry, Sheena.
use with a pinch of salt, but use yeah.
You touched on a very important point there, Sheena, around matrices and tools, especially tools like your Jira, your Obtains, Asana, and Co. In terms of managing multiple teams, we gravitate towards using those tools as a dashboard to give you insight into what's going on. And I find that it can be, it's a double-edged sword, right? It can work brilliantly for you, depending on the discipline of your teams and keeping that up to date and truthful. But it can also be quite bad in the sense that we can overly rely on it, and it only tells you the numbers. It doesn't tell you the reality of what people are actually experiencing. It can be manipulated, right? We can add things in there to pad and make it look like we're busy.
Which is why you need to be in the stand-ups. We've gone full circle. Damn it.
You just missed that, Whitney.
It's a balancing act. The tools are great.
Be omnipotent.
The tools are great, and we definitely need them when you have many teams. But take it with a pinch of salt, right? It's only a tool, and it's not the people, right? The tool is great, but still have a touch base with the people, understand what actually is happening on the ground. But if you really, really cannot be there, that tool can be a really good place to start your journey from. So use it as a starting place for your conversation, but not the be all and end all.
That's big. So one thing I've been thinking about is like, so in the end, the reason you want to be in all stand-ups isn't so that you can have perfect knowledge. It's more because you want to de-risk things. And for me, like one of the ways to de-risk things is to empower people in the team as much as possible with as much information as possible. So there's a bunch of different ways to do that, and one is like when issues or tasks or like the project gets spec'd out, like how does that happen? Like how do you make sure that people like understand as much as possible? And then there's also like when the project gets broken down into little pieces, like how do you know the people like if there's a task, it shouldn't just be understood by one team member. It should be understood by multiple people. So how do you make that happen? And like one way to do that is with estimates or like planning poker and things like that. It's just like if people are disagreeing vastly on the size of a task, then they're disagreeing vastly on like what it actually implies. So like, are there mechanisms for getting people to get people to understand in a shared way? Yewitz?
I've got some experience with this. I worked on a project where CTO was a very famous CTO, a really cool guy, and he suggested that basically the whole dev team tried to scope a lot of the problem as well. So we did BDD, behavior-driven development. It is development.
Yeah.
So BDD is traditionally done like where you embed it inside the code, but maybe I can just try and give people a framework. I kind of forget how it goes, but it's like it's kind of similar to user stories. Like if I'm an admin, I do this action and I expect this outcome, kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. But when you have multiple different people writing it, it's not just the most technical person or one person scoping the tasks. We actually discovered all sorts of ways in which people could misinterpret the same sentence. We discovered much better validation and errors as a result of having multiple people look at the problem from all sorts of different angles. I will, however, say that it did feel quite inefficient, but we were scoping a very, very, very complicated app. So that also maybe comes into it. But I would recommend if you're with a dev team, doesn't hurt also just getting people to weigh in on how they would evaluate the definition of done. Even they can assist sometimes and as a group you end up just sanity checking it, so it's not just estimates for that.
That's good.
So I struggle a lot with estimates. If you had asked me in 2016, I would have told you there's no other way. you have to estimate, and you have to, I was a big consumer of Robert C. Martin and everything that he was teaching, and I kind of like cargo cult followed his work. And I think for me, it's very important to understand your team and how they work and the different temperaments in the last company I worked at before this. It's the estimation never worked. Like, we tried
Yeah,
story
it's a lot of
sizing
effort.
and things like that. They
Yeah.
just never worked. The process that we use has been very unique, and I haven't been able to reproduce it to this point. When we scoped work, we jumped onto Miro because we were remote, and we started writing tickets, right? So if we're building this feature, what are the things that we need to think about from a functional point? And if we're rescheduling, oh no, there's the back end part, there's the front end, and there's this. What apps are we touching? And we started basically mapping out the work, and people would say, oh no, this feature, this component already exists in this service, and we can just pull that in. And that mind mapping worked specifically for that team, and we didn't have to do any sizing. We didn't do user stories or anything like that. We just spoke about the problem until someone said,
That's cool.
yeah, we're on the same page, or no, but you forgot about this. And at that point, the team was mature enough that we knew who could get something faster if we were trying to do things fast, and we knew who hadn't touched a piece of code if we were trying to do more education, and we had the luxury of time. So I think the most important thing is really bedding down and understanding the temperaments of your team, and understand what the aim is at that point, so that you can know what approach will work for that team. Because sometimes it's like, I need to get this done fast, or sometimes it's about, we need more people in the team to actually understand how this works, to de-risk ourselves. And it's not an exact science. So
Oh, that's a
but I
really
think
cool approach, though. I
flexibility.
really like it. Yeah. Yeah, Tikunde?
I like what you just said there, Vitsi, around the individuality of the teams that you dealt with, right? And how you are not able to reproduce what that one team was doing elsewhere. And when you're managing multiple teams, right, we get tempted to standardize everything. We expect everything to be done exactly the same, copy and paste from one team to the other. And that can kill that innovation, right? That team didn't need to size. They had a good system going, they had a good way of working. It works. At the end of the day, we want it to work. We want to produce stuff on time, deliver it. It works. It's bug free. It does the job, and we can repeat that process again and again. If your team is mature or is maturing and is getting there, right? No need for you to, be militant and enforce that you must do it like that other team. They use poker sizing, they use Fibonacci. Why are you not using people? No, right? That's the Fibonacci is not an end in itself. The point is, can we get something out at the time that we said we would repeatedly? And if you so don't copy and paste it. Don't treat each team like you would every other team. Let them be individuals and create their own momentum, their own identity.
So there's a question here from the audience, which I think VT, you partially answered it. I think that your mechanism of drawing out the moving parts of a task is actually a really good way to avoid conflict completely, because everybody just gets on the same page from the beginning. Are there any other interesting ways of dealing with conflict inside your teams, or any interesting kinds of conflicts that you come across? I'm sure that lots of people are like, I want to use an ORM, and someone else is like, ORMs are evil, you crazy person. And or TypeScript, oh my God, TypeScript arguments. Yeah.
Why learn SQL?
I think I think this is actually one of my favorite topics. I think a lot of people try to stay away from conflict. I kind of go head first into it. Anyone who's worked with me in the past knows I don't try to avoid conflict at all. I think conflict can be very healthy, and I think it's very difficult to achieve good collaboration without it. Right? It's about managing it, and I think it depends. as a developer, I think you're very lucky because you're in a good space with you don't have to argue whether something should be using an ORM or should be running clean SQL. I think based on your requirements, you can make a case and you can build a proof of concept and prove your point, right? Because if you are against ORM because the ORM is slow at a point and you know speed or performance is important, you can prove that the ORM is slow and thereby writing hand rolling SQL is better, right? And vice versa. If performance is not that important, you can prove that ORM leads to better developer experience and it's better to onboard people. It's easy. You can almost build something to prove your point, right? Support your case. I think conflict should definitely be encouraged in teams because I think that what leads to multiple voices being heard in the team. And these conflicts can happen where people just don't get along. And we've done multiple things, like a kickoff thing when putting together a team where people speak about their values, people speak about things that piss them off, things that make them happy. So you understand that someone else, the way of showing love in terms of where they were raised was their parents being very direct with them, right? And they won't appreciate you beating around the bush, right? So those kind of sessions surface that in terms of even as far as asking a person, how do you like to receive feedback? And someone who will tell you, I need a feedback sandwich where you tell me something good, then you tell me the bad news, then something good again, right?
Also known as a shit sandwich. So.
I was being very careful. I was being careful of the language. Right. Some people want to be direct, right? Like, get to the point. Don't waste my time. Tell me what this. I think it's about setting expectations, and it's about, again, going back to having good meetings, right? And that goes to after a meeting, I like to send an email or a Slack message if it's an internal team that basically reinforces what we've said. And even before the end of the meeting, summarize what has been said. My understanding is that this is our view of the problem. This is the approach that we're taking. Tim, you're going to do this. Sheena, you're going to do that. And then people have an opportunity to disagree, right? And again, something very, very careful, you need to be careful about is to make sure that your team understands that you attack the problem, not the person, right? So if someone starts to say things like, oh, VT, I think you're too loud or you talk too much or something like that, it's a matter of, listen, I don't appreciate feedback on myself. Can we please stick to the task, right? So if it's your presentation was too long and you lost people, that's very different to I think you talk too much, right? And it's around training your team to have, be aligned on expectations, have good meetings, and be very crystal clear on decisions that have been made.
That's good.
Yeah.
Does anybody
I
else
add
have something? Awesome.
add something to what VT just said. It really depends on the severity of the conflict for me. Are we dealing with something on the 10 Richter scale? Like, are we talking about fist fights here, personal insults? Where are we? If it's professional disagreements, professional conflict around, which technology stack to use, like what VT said, prove your point. Right? But if you are on the other end of the scale where it's becoming personal, borderline violent, don't dilly-dally with that. We don't tolerate that in the workplace. It's not professional behavior. Cut it out immediately. Do not. You need to set that example up front that we do not let things get that bad. We don't let things fester and become violent or aggressive. We cut that out immediately. So for me, I want to see where we are on that scale.
I think it's especially tricky these days because so many people are working remotely and it's much easier to be rude to text than to a face. And so I think people, it just sometimes rings out the worst in people, which is unfortunate.
Also, it's very easy to misread something as rude.
Yeah.
Because I know when I get tired and busy, but my answers get shorter and shorter and shorter, which apparently some people have told me comes across very aggressively. And it's like, No, I just don't have time to write more than this. I'm chilled. It's like, I'm not upset or anything. I'm
Yeah,
just
me as
literally
well.
very busy. So it's
Whenever
also quite
people
good
put a
to.
full stop after thanks, I get like nervous. I'm like,
Or the passive aggressive thumbs up. Did you know that the thumbs up is passive aggressive now? I learned this
but
recently. I'm like,
don't get Tim started on that topic.
In
Silliest thing ever.
in my last company, there's a smiling face that was considered passive aggressive, where in my current company it's used a lot, right? So I think context matters as well. And as someone who does dive head into conflict, what I've learned recently, I've known this, but it was reinforced recently, is that text is not the best medium for communicating. So try your best as well not to read context or add context to text that is just plain. If there's a misunderstanding, get on a call with the person and ask them if that's what they meant, right? And talk through it. And I think we got into a thing recently with a colleague where I misconstrued what they meant and they misconstrued what I meant, and it ended up to like a very, very toxic situation, which was solved by us getting on a call and basically explaining our intent and also setting our boundaries in terms of like, okay, in that case, if you disagree with something, can we use the right forum? Can we use the right approach? Maybe not text it, maybe set aside time where we can communicate properly with a bit more of the emotion and intent can be communicated properly. So I think you need to be very careful of the fact that now things are slack. People get angry at you saying hi and then waiting for something. So state your boundaries and kind of like learn to have a team contract and have everyone on the same page around how you want to communicate so that intent is clear.
I think that's
I
great.
want to just second that. I think video chat is very important if you remote a lot. A lot of people fight it and they're like, I don't want the video on. And actually, I've realized it's incredibly important because it so many fights and problems go away. The biggest problem is people don't want to turn video on. But I think sometimes it has to be required. It's sad. Like you don't want to make people feel uncomfortable, but I've just realized the amount of things problems it solves is scary. The other thing is be okay with upsetting people. It's okay as long as you're not, going out of your way to upset someone. Because there's this. I'm not going to go into the thumbs up, but everybody has their opinion and stuff like that. And if we try and make peace with everyone, you're going to end up doing nothing. You're not going to be talking to anyone or the rest of it. So it's okay to, within reason, as long as you're not antagonizing people, to just go, okay, I'm sorry that upset you, but
maybe also just being explicit in general about encouraging people to speak up. I think if you're senior, a lot of people might not want to challenge you if they decide to. A lot of time if you're senior, you're a strong personality, and then a lot of people feel a little bit like maybe they'd get, I don't know, just trying to create that framework, and also saying things like, maybe if there's a conflict, let's create some, like a little bit of a like you were saying, the social contract, where, for example, sometimes if I get really cross, I find it very difficult to modulate my voice, keep my voice really calm and be. It's normally only happened with crazy clients, okay? So it's not with dev teams. It's like the clients have no idea what they're talking about, and eventually I'm just like, I don't know how I can stop that coming through in my voice, So that happens in conflicts when regardless of video, if you're on a call and there's tension, I think sometimes it's good to remember to think about things that you can agree on as a team. Okay, cool. Let's de-escalate. Is this the right forum? I can sense myself getting upset. Maybe let's have a rule that we never fight in public forums. Let's have a one-on-one and we respect one another. It's like kind of like when you have a business partner, you make rules like you never put that person down in front of other people. And if you have some beef, you address it calmly and in private, then
no character
just want
assassinations.
to encourage that kind of like general EQ around conflict.
I just want to add, I fully agree with that, but also life isn't always perfect, and sometimes like you've got to upset people occasionally. It's very
Oh,
sad. And it's more people who are avoiding dealing with it. So like if you've got the person, you've made this rule, and they do chat with you afterwards, great. Then I'm like very, very much agree with that. Like you'd say it for later. But you have people who you'll see some people manipulate this to say, cool, we'll talk about it later, but then they do everything to ever avoid that. And at some point, sadly, at some point you just have to go, look, okay, I don't want to do this publicly, but you haven't given me any other option. Like, yeah,
Look,
it's complicated.
I'm trying to handle the case of anxious developers. Usually developers some of them can be shy and quiet and not necessarily wanting to jump in and challenge things, and saying like just explicitly for those kinds of people, encouraging open communication. But I don't know. I was going to say stuff, but
These things
let's
are
hear from
complicated.
BT.
Look, I think, for me, I beg to differ a bit more on the public spats. I think they can be very toxic and unhealthy. And I do understand. I mean, I've especially in my very early days, I've had a few public outbursts. And now that I'm a bit older, I think back about them and I cringe a bit. I think something I've learned recently that it's okay to walk away. It's okay to leave a call. Like you are upset because someone has upset you. It's okay to leave the call. It's okay to say to someone that I don't want to talk about this right now. And I think that's why I value one-on-ones a lot, because if you don't feel like you're equipped to have the conversation at a later stage in a healthy and helpful way, then lean on your manager. You use those one-on-ones, and where you say, look, I'm finding that this person is contrarian for the sake of it in every meeting, and it's really starting to feel personal and it's getting to me. How do I deal with it? Right? If you don't know how to, I think sometimes some things are not as bad as we think. They sound like we shouldn't be handling people with kid gloves. Sometimes, like, look, I think you're being very unprofessional. I think that's okay to say in public. Especially as a team, I think it's healthy to say, look, I think I'm not seeing how that is helpful, right? Of course, that must not devolve into something else that distracts from the purpose of the meeting. If it does get out of hand, it's okay to say, can we talk about this offline? And if you feel like your emotions are now so out of control and you can't handle it, leave the call. You're an adult, it's okay. Sometimes
I've left the call before, and that has irritated people before, just saying.
It's
and I was
fine.
like,
As I said,
man,
you
why?
They need
can't
to
make
grow up.
everyone happy.
Lesser of two evils.
Right.
Yeah.
If you feel like you staying on the call is going to do more damage, leave the call. It's okay. And say to them, look, I was upset and I didn't think what I would say
Yeah,
at
this
that
has been a
moment
therapy session. I'm
would
like, yes,
add
you can't do
more
this.
more value. I think something we need to keep in mind is that like people at work are mostly adults, unless you're lucky enough to get into a workspace at 18, and maybe you can be forgiven for being very young and still learning things. But these are real human beings that you're dealing with, and as much as we want to try and avoid identity situations and conflict and all of those things, human beings are complex. They're complex systems interacting with other complex systems. There's going to be a lot of teething pains in putting a team together, and that is going to include upsetting each other. And I think it's okay for you to remove yourself from a situation sometimes. And it's going to happen, especially as you manage more teams. You'll have that one person who every small inconvenience are going to come to you. And it's going to be a learning experience to say, maybe you need to learn to deal with things yourself. And sometimes, ultimately, you realize you have the wrong people in the team and you need to remove them, right? And I think all of these things need to happen for you to eventually actually have a healthy and meaningful organization.
Another strategy, I totally agree with that, everything you said there. Sometimes if you are struggling, it's also you can get an impartial adjudicator. Because when you're angry with someone, like I know everybody's unfair, both sides. And sometimes just having somebody else that that's listening, who's slightly impartial, who does. The problem is finding somebody who doesn't care about it that much can make a big difference just to calm things down. Just the fact
Let's
that somebody's
let's
listening
call
can
to
calm things
Kunda.
down.
It's got that calm, rational voice of reason.
I've even gone so far as to invite somebody into a meeting, like if, like I was having a disagreement with somebody, and I'm like, this somebody will be on good behavior if this guy's in the room. So I'm going to invite this guy, just like ask him to be there, and just like chip in if you feel like you can add value, but please just be there. And
It's
can
weird how
often
often that can make a difference.
Yeah.
There's a question that came up around unhealthy competition within the team, and
Yes, I was actually wanting to bring that one up.
I
Here it is.
have some recent experience around that, around this unhealthy competition within the team, and it was quite interesting when we were trying to retrospect on that sentiment within the team, because we were discussing it as a leadership team, not with the actual development team that was experiencing this unhealthy competition. And some of the leaders in the room were saying, they actually encouraged that competition within the developers, because they want the best to rise up and take up more senior roles. And so this is one way of choosing between individuals. And the other side of the room, they really didn't like that. They wanted the clarity there on the selection criteria. Who gets promoted is based on certain parameters, right? And certain behavioral traits, accomplishments, etc., etc. And having that clarity would help to dissolve that competition within the team and make it clear how you go about it if you want to get promoted. And I guess it's something that I also want us to talk about right now, to say, how do we deal with unhealthy competition? Should we be encouraging competition to see who comes up tops and who takes the cup? And how do you guys take care of that?
I'm not sure you should be encouraging competition. Look, you should encouraging people to be good, and yes, to argue their facts, right? But then also try to do it in a way that it's not a competitive thing. Like, it's hard to explain. Like, competition is good. Like, encouraging competition. Oh, you two go at it and whoever wins. Like, to me, that's starting to get a bit unhealthy, because you can have one person's going to take that too far. On a more personal level, like if somebody's competing against you, just don't worry about it. Just get on with your work. Generally, I find that just works the best.
Yeah, I also think like a good dev team is made up of team members who set each other up for success rather than tripping each other up in different ways. And if you encourage too much competition, then they can do some very unhealthy things. Like I've worked with people who, like for example, just like wrote their code in the most convoluted way possible in order to confuse their teammates so that they would look smart, and they would be the only person who could deal with that part of the system. It's like, nah, don't do that.
Those are people you want to remove fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I also think like people can change and people can grow. And if somebody is doing something silly and toxic, like sometimes you can train them out of it, but like sometimes you can't. But I do believe in people's capacity to change, definitely. Yeah.
But you also do get the healthy competition. Like if you're competing at someone, like, which of us can make this SQL statement the fastest? I mean, that's more like a
Yeah, I think that's cool.
It doesn't actually matter who wins, but and then you can also see what the other person's done. It's like, oh, that's interesting.
No, I think they talk, but like this question's like undercurrents, like the passive aggressive or something. I would say personally try and figure out like what is the motivation? Where are the sore points? Because this is like the shadow part of yourself. Maybe you don't feel like you know, like why are these people? Why is it like a battle to the top? Usually in a company or in a team, you can both definitely add value. So maybe somebody feels less good about themselves, or they feel like there's it's a zero-sum game where there's only one position to be promoted into, and like maybe there's only one team lead position, but it's not good winning by terrible standards either. Like you're not going to win everybody over by being ruthless. I think.
I think you win that game better by just being good. It's hard to explain.
Yeah. Look, I think
it's hard to explain. Like I've hit this a couple of times where what I'm saying is, compete, but don't go into anything toxic. Like, and when they start doing stuff, like don't join in. Like just be better. It's hard to explain what I mean.
Oh, take the
I
high
think
road.
I think it really
Yeah, it's
depends.
tough.
I think it really depends in terms of where you are in the team. I think as a leader or as a manager, it's your responsibility to keep a team healthy. And again, very careful of my language. I think the brilliant bully in the team can be toxic. And I think in some cases you need to remove the person because they just don't add to the team. But I think more on your own responsibility as a leader and as a business generally is to be very clear on things. I think if you're very clear on your career ladders, then people are not confused about when they might be eligible for promotion or things like that, or whether
VT,
they
career ladders are notoriously hard in dev teams. Like this is it could be a whole nother topic. I'd actually love to pick your
I
brains about.
yeah,
It's like
I'd love to chat about that. Look, I don't think they have to be perfect. I think it's around defining things, right? And having well documented artifacts that people can refer to, because people understand the criteria by which they're being judged, right? So big companies tend to have things like KPIs, right? I'm a big fan of using OKRs in my teams, so objective key results, where again, and I've said this, I'm sure people could make a drinking game out of me saying that aligning people to outcomes more than anything else, and that's what you judge people on, because if the outcome is to achieve this and that, then everything that the team is doing has to be in service of that outcome,
hang
right?
on a second. Whoa.
Yeah.
I feel like it's sorry. I'm curious about this, so I just want to dig into this a little bit. If, for example, you're the leader of a team, right?
Yes.
Now, one of your employees one of the people in the team that's not a leader is finding that somebody else is being in toxic competition with them. Some of the time, the outcome may come about regardless, but there's this undercurrent of toxic energy and competition in the team. Like you may not even see it. You know what I mean? Like, so you're like, oh, the person's like, dude, this person's being passive aggressive with me, and I can't put my finger on it, but there's this like tension, and they're experiencing this like emotional lack of safety in the team. So sometimes, I guess maybe I'm curious about how people would deal with that, but I think good teams have good psychological safety. They have good trust and vulnerability between them, and sometimes that means doing hard things that you get that feeling of like being in war and like being in the trenches, and then you get that bond that's like very hard to break after that. And it's amazing in some ways, but I guess how do you encourage that?
So one strategy that I've used in the past is to ask why you want to be part of this team. You know? What's in it for you to be in this team? I mean, on the surface level, there's the obvious, I need a paycheck, you know. But let's go a little bit lower than that. What's in it for you? If this team does well, what does that mean for you, Tim? What does the future hold for you if we knock this out the park? And you'll find that what's in it for Tim and what's in it for VT, it's not the same thing. Tim might be wanting to go on to Google and do ABCD. Tim might want to go on to Spotify and do ABC. We're not all after the same thing. And sometimes that unhealthy competition brews because we think the scope of advancement in life is so narrow and so limited. I must get the cup, and if I don't get it, team is gonna get it. A team is not even after the same cup that I'm after. You understand? And if I know that, and I know that, oh, no one here is actually competing for the same thing I want, it might help to lower my, fight instinct and actually make me realize it's better for me to make sure we all win because if I get team to win with me, I get what I want, and team gets what he wants.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. You've just got to watch out. If you get some really toxic people who will lie out things, you've got to have some emotional intelligence and empathy to actually to be able to do a lot of these things. They're gray areas, and you need to be able to read people to a bit. So, like, sadly, there isn't like here's the list of rules to watch out for and what to say. I just want to answer to VT's, like, having very prescribed things of this is how you go up the ladder can also be problematic. So let's say, you hit a problem and I can do the thing that goes up the ladder or can fix the client's problem. Well, then I should do the thing that takes me up the ladder, right? Because that's what the company's telling me I need to do, not fix the problem. And that's why I'm saying you've got to be careful about,
But
I'm very wary of these like very prescribed, these are the rules.
but that's not what career laddering is, right? It's so for example, if you're gonna be a principal consultant, right? You're expected to deal with clients. You're expected to be competent in some level of admin, being able to deal with meetings and things like that. That might not be your flavor, right? Managing people, if I ask someone, are you okay with about 70% of your week being meetings? And you're like, nope, that doesn't sound like, you might more be suited for the more technical track and becoming a principal engineer as opposed to being. So that's what I mean about, again, using heuristics to kind of figure out where
How are
people
you
are.
measuring those?
As
This is where I say it gets great.
Okay,
I
well,
did it meetings.
okay,
I
guys,
stated
guys.
that. I know. I mean, I'm more saying
I
this
can
is where
share.
I want a whole another hour on this topic.
I think
alone,
we do actually
because-
need a whole other hour. Yeah.
I can share that with you. Something I've actually been working on recently, but I think it's a whole different conversations. I think with more to your question, Whitney, with that unhealthy competition, I think being a leader or being a manager, it's hard work. It's not glamorous. You need to be comfortable having the uncomfortable conversations, and I think some things you need to call them out specifically. Have the two people listen. Sheena, Tim thinks you're being passive aggressive because every single time, and have concrete
Then they're gonna.
examples, right?
You
When
have siblings, VT.
sorry, I do. I have siblings and children, so and children. I think, look, at the end of the day, I think feedback and timely feedback and training your team around how to actually handle feedback. I think, if you have an interaction today and you wait 3 months to bring it up, or you wait for your 360 review, then it's too late. It's not timely. But it becomes in stand up today, Tim, you said 1, 2, 3, right? Which is an objective fact. This is a thing you said. When you said that, it made me feel this way, right? Which, again, you can't dispute how something makes me feel, right? And then you can have a conversation around that because number one, you're not just going on emotion, you're going on a fact of something that happened, and you're only explaining how it makes you feel, and it gives you an opportunity to say, I'm sorry it made you feel that way. That was not my intention. I was intending to do this. And I think when that starts to reoccur, as a leader, it's up to you to say, guys, this is happening too much. We're wasting time. We're not achieving anything. Something has to give. And I think when you have that emotional maturity, you'll be able to gauge, who's in the wrong here. It's going to take time, but I think then companies should have ways of either moving people out if they don't kind of fit the team, or like trying whatever corrective measure they have. I think it's leading teams. Even one team is hard. Leading multiple teams is harder. It kind of wants you to be willing to have those difficult conversations.
This is great. So this is a rabbit hole, and I think Whitney's right in that we should probably have a whole other conversation just about this, because I think we can go on for quite some time, and we are officially over time. But this has been wonderful, and I feel actually a bit bad about cutting it short, because this is juicy. It's good.
Rabble.
But yeah, let us have another conversation. And are you guys happy to wrap up? Do you have any parting words to our audience? Shall we plug VT's podcast again? What's it called again?
Yeah.
ZA Tech Radio. So you can find it on zatechradio.co.za.
Cool. Also, if anybody doesn't know about ZA Tech in the audience, then it's a Slack channel for all technical people in South Africa, and everybody's welcome, and it's very
Including the
supportive
podcast.
and lovely. and they've got a radio, they've got a whole podcast, and it's amazing. So
Yeah, join up. Even if you're from Uganda or Nigeria, because some of our audience members are from there. Welcome, guys. Yeah, awesome. Have a beautiful evening, everybody.
thanks,
You too.
guys.
Have a great evening.
Nice.